We are back, and this is Green Mountain Mornings on KVT Talk, where Brattleboro listens. I'm your host, Olga Peters. Welcome back, Randy Holhut from the Commons.
Hello again.
Hello again. And just a reminder to listeners that this segment of Green Mountain Mornings is being filmed by Brattleboro Community Television. It will be online later today, and broadcast of Green Mountain Mornings tonight is sponsored by Brattleboro Savings and Loan. Hey, Randy. Did you attend the cow parade this year? Mm. I know you did because I saw you.
Well, since I've been back at the Commons, I've done everyone since then. Mm-hmm. And this year, I thought there was a little too much Star Wars and not enough cows.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many farms they had this year compared to last year, but it did seem like fewer animals this year.
Yeah, that they had to go further afield to get the cows to march. You know, the Putney schools, as one of the charter members of the heifer stroll, will always have cows there. Mm-hmm. And our friends from Walpole at Pinnacle View 4-H are always well represented. But when you're having to go up to Heartland to have cows from their 4-H club, and having to go down to Massachusetts, down into the Connecticut Valley to find cows, mm-hmm. It's just getting harder and harder to find animals in Windham County, aside from the Franklin Farm and the Thurbers.
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, it's a signal of the time of how much our dairy industry in Vermont, which traditionally has been quite robust, and also our other farms that are raising animals, in general, how hard the market is for them right now.
I know the milk market is completely collapsed. And the prices that the Vermont farmers are getting for milk is absurdly low, mm-hmm. compared to what it's costing them to make that gallon of milk.
Right.
The gap between those two prices is about $5 or $6.
Ooh, which adds up if you've got a certain head of cattle, because that's 5 or 6.
Energy's up, feed is up, veterinary mm-hmm. care is up, labor costs are up, mm-hmm. and the only thing that hasn't gone up is the milk check.
Right. Yeah, for how long? I mean, the milk market has always been kind of up and down. I don't think that part's anything new. But this real discrepancy between cost and what you make, the milk check, how long has that been getting wider?
Well, that's been getting wider for years, but it's really accelerated now because there's less milk being exported. Mm-hmm. There are fewer people drinking milk in this country. Somehow milk, the little ones aren't pounding down milk like we used to when we were young'uns.
And I really lucked out because a lot of the milk I drank came right up from the barn. I drank raw milk before I knew it was a thing.
Well, but and I drank a lot of milk, which I think was why I grew up to be 6 feet tall. Probably,
actually.
that I was loved milk, but now the kids are drinking soda more than milk, and milk isn't cool.
Right. Yeah, and cheese is supposed to be so bad for you, quote unquote.
Oh, it is, huh?
Who knew?
But so just you kind of wonder, where have all the farmers gone? Mm-hmm. And there are a lot. And how does a young person get into the business? Because another big problem for farming in Vermont is the median age of a farmer in Vermont is about near 60.
Right, and land can be quite a hefty thing to invest in, which is one thing you do often need as a farmer.
Well, yes, you kind of needed to grow things.
Or graze things, or yes.
And considering how important farming is to keep making Vermont look like Vermont.
Yeah, that's the part of the conversation that people often forget is, I sometimes think that farming is a little bit like, this is awful, but our relationship to farming has changed in this country, and it's kind of changed like it has to the military. For a long time, especially given that we had World War II and then World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, boom, 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 boom. For many years, it was very common to have a family member in the military, and quite common to have had them drafted. And it's the same thing for a long time. Everybody had a farmer in the family or were farmers themselves. And now that has changed. There are fewer people farming. And I think because of that, there are fewer people understanding how agriculture fits into everybody's daily life.
And that's a very good analogy, because the percentage of people farming and the percentage of people serving in the military are about the same.
Oh, no kidding. There you go. I was having a moment. I must have had enough coffee this morning. So for your thoughts, Randy, as someone who has covered Windham County for quite a few years, what do you think is the way forward? I mean,
I don't know, because I've been writing about dairies going under since the mid '80s, when I was still a young reporter in Worcester County and Massachusetts, in the first whole herd buyouts that were taking place back in the mid '80s.
Yeah.
And the sadness of watching farmers give up their herds because you can't afford to keep them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still happening. The number of farms keeps dwindling and dwindling. And I think the only thing that can save Vermont agriculture is finding new markets, trying to keep distribution and processing as close to Vermont as possible, and to keep the big conglomerates. Dean Foods down in Texas owns, I think, controls about something like about 80% of the milk market in New England.
Wow.
They own Hood, they own Heroic Farms, they own pretty much almost every dairy in New England.
Mm-hmm. Do they own Thompson?
Thomas Milk?
Thomas Milk?
No, that's the difference.
Okay.
If that's a family farm, they milk the cows, they bottle the milk, process the milk, and they distribute the milk.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why that tastes so good.
Unfortunately, we are out of time and need to go to the local news, but Randy and I will return after the break. Hey there, we are back, and this is Green Mountain Mornings on KVT Talk, where Brattleboro listens. I'm your host, Olga Peters, 39 minutes past the top of the hour. And hey there, Randy Holhut from the Commons.
Dude!
Dude!
Yeah, I know. You hear that opening riff to Slow Ride, and you think of Camaro or a Trans Am. You think of a open neck shirt and a gold chain. You gotta.
I mean, that's one thing I do like about my bumper music is I get to pick everything from Camaros with gold chains to Blink 182 to a little. Every now and then I get some Frank Sinatra in there. I tell ya, it's just a potpourri box.
Oh, kind of like your friends over on the other side of the studio.
Well, I like to think.
Olga, we play everything.
No, Olga, we talk about anything. Speaking of anything, it seems like we still have a bit of a Michigas up in Montpelier these days.
Montpelier?
Montpelier, yes, we love our Montpelier. And what are you hearing from the community these days, Randy? The Commons has that Great Voices section. So are people weighing in?
They are, and it's mainly WTF. This is the letters of the day when it comes to what's happening with the education bill. what's happening with the budget.
I'm not surprised. I had a listener call in last week, maybe, during the commercial break, and she says, wait, I just need some clarification here. I said, okay, I'll do my best. And she said, so the governor has wants to veto the budget, and he's gone into a special session because he wants to save the state money. I said, basically, yeah, affordability is a big part of his campaign promise. And he's trying to make sure that we keep taxes low, no new taxes, no new fees, that kind of thing. And she says, well, doesn't it cost them money to keep the Montpelier open for the special session? And I said, yeah, I'm not quite sure how much, but yes, the reps and everybody are getting stipends and that kind of thing. And she said, well, but then that's costing us money. I said, yes, dear, it is. And she said, so he's not really saving us money. I said, no, not really. And she went, okay, that's all I needed to know. I said, I'm glad I could help. But I think that kind of sums up a lot of what I'm hearing from folks when they're scratching their head saying, I get it. We want Vermont to be affordable, but how is this budget standoff making that happen?
It's not. This is more about philosophy than numbers.
Unfortunately, I think you're right.
Because there's a surplus and it's growing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the monthly reports from the Department of Revenue have been pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And money is flowing in. Some of it's due to the tweaks to the federal tax code, and some of it's due to the economy. By and large, in Vermont's going quite well.
Right.
But this is more of a philosophical thing about education spending, and the growing whispers we're hearing that the Koch agenda is creeping into Vermont.
I think that is a lot of people's worry and concern, that what Governor Scott is ultimately doing, or his administration, we won't put it all on his shoulders, even though a lot of it is on his shoulders. A lot of what the administration is doing in the long term could change the landscape of how Vermont does its legislature, basically, and builds policy.
Yes, and if there's one thing that's the hallmark of conservatism in America these days is that they play the long game and play for they're patient and willing to spend money to build from the ground up. And the result is that how much of the media is controlled by conservatives, how much of the courts are controlled by conservatives, how many of the legislatures around the country are controlled by conservatives, and and how demonized things that used to be agreed upon as common sense have become, just through sheer repetition. I mean, one of my favorite euphemisms that the Koch faction likes to use is they like to refer to public schools as government schools.
Right. Yeah, that boggles my mind. Or even I have a hard time with things like Medicare called entitlement programs.
Yeah.
You've paid into that system.
Yes.
Entitlement makes it sound like it's this get out of jail free.
And that was also created from the conservative word factory. Turn things that every American pays into and works for to keep going, like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and turn those into entitlements.
Right.
No.
As if you're lazy and you're just getting something for free.
Well, and also, they're trying to do the food stamp program to try and put work requirements on it.
Right.
And for Medicare too. Like, you're on Medicaid. You're on Medicaid for a reason. You probably have a disability and can't work.
Mm-hmm.
But we're getting away from the plot here, which is trying to change the education system in Vermont and trying to push private schools.
Yeah. And I don't fully understand that. I really don't see how in the long term that would be the better investment. Not and I'm not saying that to diss either private versus public schools or anything like that. Just looking at the structure of how schools different schools pay for themselves. I don't see how going to like tuitioning students is going to save money in the long term.
Well, it's a different thing in Vermont because I mean Vermont has a lot of good private schools in the state, and we're looking more of the model elsewhere where any bunch of charlatans with a flashy PowerPoint program and a good patter can create themselves a charter school.
Okay.
And turn education into yet another commodity to make profits off of. And those are the types of schools that are not to be confused with Compass School or Putney School or Northfield Mount Herman. Schools with private schools with long histories of academic achievement and innovative education techniques. We're talking about trying to make as much money as possible off of education. How you do that? You hire folks with minimal educational credentials. You weed out the special ed kids because you're allowed to, if you're a charter school, to say, go somewhere else. We don't need you.
Right.
Can cherry pick your best students and have great test scores to show off to your potential parents and families going to the school, saying, "Hey, look at us. We're academically at the top."
Right.
And and the record of charter schools is pretty dismal out there, and the landscape is littered with people that just kind of took the money and ran and left the kids stranded with a crappy school and a crappy education.
And how do you see Scott and his administration fitting into all this? I mean, I know we have our fears that this is what's happening, that changing education will reach the point in Vermont where we're all going to charter schools or something. But what do you think concretely is happening right now?
Right now, it's one of those divide and conquer things. I mean, the conservatives hate the teachers union, the National Education Association, blame it for all the ills in American education. Those greedy, overpaid, underworked teachers. And they're a source of power for the Democratic Party. They've always been the teachers union has always been a big booster of the Democrats. And weaken the teachers union, weaken the Democratic Party, consolidate our control. That's some pretty simple playbook right there. So demonize the teachers, denigrate them at every turn, try and take away their bargaining rights. Like the Wisconsin model that Scott Walker used.
Right.
And win. Because, I mean, I don't get those benefits. Why should they get those benefits? If you sow that thought into people's heads and make them jealous of teachers rather than saying, hey, these people are doing a really important job that most of us can't do. And it's really critical to the health of our democracy, what teachers do.
Yes.
And they deserve that and more. And actually, the polling, if you look at polling data, a lot of Americans believe that. The teachers aren't being paid enough for what they do.
Oh, yeah. I would not want to be left alone in a room full of ankle biters.
Well, have you ever done substitute teaching before?
No, because it terrifies me.
Yes, I have over when I was younger, not quite as smart, or not quite in love with sleep. And yeah, it's even as a substitute teacher, being in a classroom is terrifying,
Mm-hmm.
and it is, it's a lot of work, and it's harder. It's being a teacher is harder, much harder than it looks.
Yeah.
You just think, oh, you get the summers off and all those vacations and that. No, no, no.
No. No, and that skill of, I mean, one thing that makes really good teachers is their ability to identify where a student is in their learning process and what they need next. And you think about it, especially in, say, elementary school, you've got a teacher who is doing that for anywhere from, 15 to 30 children. And you're doing it for children who do not necessarily have the emotional or social experience to express what they need.
And and that's why it seems like schools are overstaffed.
Mm-hmm.
But children are hitting our schools who are in real need of help.
Yeah. And that's the part that's that doesn't work on, that's the thing about Scott when he talks about education quite often. He does it as a very definite A plus B equals C kind of equation. And when you're dealing with something like trauma or poverty or a child coming from a family with substance abuse issues, that does not work out to a neat little A plus B equals C.
Yeah, and you can't put quotas like they're being proposed on schools that you have too many employees at the school, you get penalized
Mm-hmm.
for spending too much money.
Right.
As people who follow the school budgets know, all it takes is one or two special needs children to move into your school
Mm-hmm.
to just blow up your budget.
Right.
And it's not that that's a horrible thing, but by law it's required that children with special needs are mainstreamed to the greatest extent possible.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens.
Yeah.
And you can't just pretend that it doesn't.
Well, and here's the thing. I think the quandary that the state has gotten itself into is it's trying to take or it's not trying. It sits as this 60,000 foot view, looking at all these different districts, all these different schools, and it's trying to find a formula or a way that would encompass the nitty gritty ground level. And unfortunately, every school is different. And every classroom is different, and every grade is different. And so how do you come up with this 60,000 foot formula that can work at ground zero?
Yeah, and that's what's being argued to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
How can you do this in a way that's affordable and maintains the high level of quality that's in Vermont's educational system right now?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have gone over time. So
As
Randy,
usual.
as usual, but that's because Randy and I could talk all day very easily. So Randy, thank you so much for joining me today. If folks don't hear me sign off at the end of the show, I will be back Monday morning. It just means that Randy and I went over time. So, hey, Randy, have a great weekend.
You too.